I'm Duncan Hunter.
And I'm Duncan Hunter.
And you're listening to the very first episode of our new podcast series. We're going to talk about Congress because we've been in it for 40 years, what it's like to be in it, what it's supposed to be, philosophy, pop culture, politics, technology, American history, and we're going to interview not just military leaders and governmental leaders. We're going to talk to people from all walks of life, people that we've known for a long time, people that are interesting, people that have done some crazy stuff and lived to tell about it, including quite a few things that we've done. My dad and I have been in politics from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. We've deployed during wartime to Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We're going to share stories, we're going to share secrets, and we're going to share many lessons learned. I'm not a junior. My middle name is different than my dad's. I grew up in San Diego. I graduated from college here in San Diego. 9/11 happened a few years after I graduated. I joined the Marine Corps, did a couple of tours in Iraq, one in Afghanistan, had a company or two, got into Congress with Barack Obama, got out of Congress with Donald Trump. I was indicted by the DOJ, crushed by the Department of Justice, and pardoned by President Donald J. Trump. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll talk about ourselves, and you'll learn more about me, I'm sure, as this podcast goes on. But today, for the first time and the only time, my dad is going to be the interviewee. I'm going to ask him some questions and talk about what he's done. And the very first question I have, as we get into who you are and what you've done in your life, is this: what was it like to run for president and lose?
Well,
there you go.
Hey,
I'm glad you didn't know the
America
questions.
great again.
All right.
It was a lot of fun.
That was in 2008, right?
Yeah. First thing that goes through my mind is it was a lot of fun. And while
how could that be fun?
You know something, that's the greatness of this country. We don't evaluate the nation very often, and there's only a few institutions or a few occasions where the country is seen as one, it comes together. One is during a war, especially like a World War II. One is our sports events, Super Bowls, and the presidential election. That's a big deal. It's a unifying event where you get a chance, if you're involved in it, to see the country. Traveling around, garnering my 1% of the vote, was a magnificent experience.
Now I thought you were
and your mom enjoyed it too.
Mom.
She said she liked getting away from you.
Right. I think Mom would have a much different take on this than you do. Yeah, that's the thing about politics, though. The family suffers kind of for what happens. The person that's in politics, whether we're sadists or we're narcissistic or we just don't care, and you have to push on, and you can't care what the detractors think. The family bears the brunt of that. But let's go back. That was 2008. I thought you had just under 5% of the vote because you didn't hit the 5% threshold to be in the big Fox News debate that was like the fifth debate. And as you know, if you're not on TV, no one's going to vote for you because they don't know who you are.
Yeah, no, I think I was in the first 6 debates before Fox and the host of the I think it was the 6th debate or 7th debate in New Hampshire, where I was informed that my presence was no longer needed in that debate. And when I couldn't get much of a vote in the Nevada primary, that's when I came back and gave my I'm leaving the campaign speech. And I think the only mention was I think Jay Leno, who said, "Big news today, Duncan Hunter dropped out of the presidential race," and he said the real question for America is, who the heck is Duncan Hunter? Nobody knew. And I actually had a Republican lady in San Diego, my hometown, about a week later, who said, "You know, I've been listening to some of your speeches." This is after I'd campaigned for 2 years for president. She said, "You know, you ought to run for president someday." And I said, "That's my problem." But seriously,
hey, wait, tell me the story.
It was a lot of fun.
Tell me the story about Shepard Smith. When Fox News didn't let you on the debate, you smile now. You were not happy. You were livid. You were angry because if they won't let you on TV, then you know that you're not connecting with millions of people that would vote for you. Yeah, and they're all going to tune into that Fox News debate. That was our base. The Fox News base was our voting base. you were angry, and I remember something happened with Shepard Smith. Tell me about that.
Well, Roy Tyler was my press guy, but Shepard Smith, I think, was charged with the Fox leadership to winnow out the non-viable candidates, because he was asking me very pointed questions about, why are you in this race anymore, Hunter? You got to get out. You might have had a chance early on, but you don't have one now. And so I said to him, I said, Shepard, are you CNN? And incidentally, hasn't he gone to CNN?
Yeah,
or he's gone. So anyway, I got a call from my press guy who said, Shepard called me very upset and said that you were so disconcerting that he had to go home.
Did he cry?
He had to leave the studio. Did not cry.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so I'm sure. But I'm sure my absence.
But you made him go
felt.
home. Good job.
But I did help. I did help Huckabee. We became great friends. We were stationed off to the side in the early debates where you had 8 or 9 guys, right, at the Reagan Library. And Huckabee and I became great friends. Giuliani and I became good friends. I knew John McCain well. We got along well.
Governor Huckabee asked you if you would be his Secretary of Defense if he were to win after you were out of the race.
Well,
right?
I think he said that tongue in cheek, but we did have a great friendship and still do. Huh. And and Huckabee was very much taken with you, and in fact appeared at one of your events, one of your fundraisers.
And Sarah Huckabee was fantastic. I mean, she was magnificent for Trump.
Yeah,
she rocked.
I called Sarah Huckabee when she was running Mike's campaign, or she was doing the logistics, the wagon master, because she was like taking a bunch of covered wagons across the plains. She had everything in place, and she drove on. Huh. Great lady, yeah, and I'm sure making a great governor of Arkansas.
That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, a lot of fun. You see the country. You get to appreciate the country and the people. And I'll tell you something, this country is a magnificent, wonderful, great country, and unfortunately it's filled with a lot of people now who don't appreciate it. And lack of appreciation is one of the worst things that can happen to people, not appreciating what life has been, and in our case, not appreciating how great this country's been. So you were indicted. So being a conservative who's indicted by Democrats is now almost it's a mark of
badge of honor.
Of fame.
Well.
But you worked through that. Trump came through like a champion. I know one of the criminal charges against you was running in the Marine Corps Marathon.
Yeah, that's illegal.
We really got to watch out for those guys who run the Marine Corps Marathon.
Let me ask you, you have a great outlook. You ran for president. You don't just run for president one day and even get 1 or 2% of the American vote. That doesn't happen. So let's go back. You're born here in Southern California, Riverside, just north of San Diego, before the 1950s, right? You 1948. Yeah. I should know this. 1948.
48.
48. Okay.
Hey, but I like 58 better. Yeah. So Dad, your grandfather, was a magnificent guy and kind of epitomized America. And still does. I still think the greatest man I ever knew. He was in the Marines in World War II. He was running cattle, got in the Marines, went off to fight, came back, built homes, and in the early 50s, he put us all together, got us all on the station wagon. We drove to Washington, D.C. He walked into the headquarters of the National Republican Party. He said, "My name is Bob Hunter, and I'm here to give you a year of my life, and we're going to help America." And the head of the party at that point, who was a guy named Ab Herman, and he later told Dad, he said, "Bob, I thought you were some kind of nut." He said, "Nobody comes to Washington with no angle but to help America." But Dad did. Never asked for anything from government.
That's crazy, actually. Could you imagine that now?
Yeah, and
I wouldn't do that, not even close.
We'd be home in Riverside, and Dad would say, they got a special election in the 25th district. All the kids get in the station wagon. We're going to go up and hand out brochures. And we would go do that. So he had a great sense of our nation and how valuable it was. So fast forward, 1980, I'm sitting in my law office, which was half of a barber shop in the barrio in San Diego. And I think I was charging people $10 an hour. Dad said, "You're not worth it. You need more trial work." I was a young lawyer. He came into my office. He said, "You can win this congressional district." I said, "Dad, it's 2-to-1 Democrat, 56 to 29%. And he said, "You can do it. Reagan's running. The issues will be defense and jobs, the economy." And he said, in San Diego, defense does mean jobs. He said, "You can do it." I said, "Shouldn't I maybe run for city council or assembly?" He said, "You'll just make enemies on the way up. We're running for Congress." We went out in the rain. We got enough signatures to do it. And we managed to win. It was a great year. 1980 was a great year to run as a Republican.
Yeah.
But you came in as a guy who was, when you came back from Iraq, you worked in the private sector for a little bit, and then when I ran, you came over to help me, but then you threw your hat in for Congress, 2010.
2007.
2007, and that's right, because you ran in the 2008
And I went to
election.
Afghanistan in 2007.
They sent you back to Afghanistan
Yeah,
while you
after
were
I had
running.
announced for Congress. About 2 months later, I get a form letter from President Bush recalling me to active duty.
Yeah.
So I'd done 2 Iraq tours, 03 and 04.
You know, he really liked
and
you.
gotten out. Yeah, I felt very special. And then went to Afghanistan during the campaign. And because of the Hatch Act,
Yeah.
I couldn't do any. The Hatch Act is a law, as you know, but it's a law that does not allow somebody in the military to express political views or have a political stance of any kind. That doesn't count anymore in this culture that we're in. Things have changed a little bit, but back then, even as little as 10 years ago, you weren't able to talk politics, especially if you're running for Congress. So the point is,
Do you realize what they're doing to us on
couldn't-
social? You realize what they're doing to us on social media? We basically got the Hatch Act for the military now expanded to all Americans. You can't be a conservative and talk Republican language on the social media.
Yeah.
Right? We've got a censorship of sorts going on where everything Republican is defined as bad and censorable. So we've got to have little private conversations like this one.
Right, that's going to go out to everybody and probably get censored.
Yeah.
There was a gap between 1980 and 1950, right, where you went back to D.C. and came back here. You joined the Army. And a question I have is, my grandfather, your father, was a United States Marine, a very proud United States Marine, and yet his son joined the Army. And I mean, that must have been seen as just a real letdown for the family, right?
You know how that happened.
That's called a loaded
Let me
question.
go. It wasn't a letdown. Be all you can be. Go Army. But let me tell you why it happened. Just how it happened. Because a lot of things, you know, one thing about us hunters, we're not people that sit down and plan out the next 10 years. I went down, I think my 1.7 grade average at the University of California at Santa Barbara told me I probably wouldn't be invited back. I went down to the recruiting center, I think it was a post office in Riverside, California, and I went to the Marine Corps booth to sign up to be a Marine like my dad as an enlisted guy, right? He was an officer, but I was signing up to be a private. The Marine had left for lunch. Let this be a lesson to you. He was out to lunch. So the Army booth is next to it, and that guy was there. So I went over, joined the Army, and they said, get on the bus. That's how I joined the Army.
That figures. Okay, I got it. And you joined, you enlisted, you weren't an officer.
Yep.
And you went to airborne school here, then you went to Vietnam. In what year?
No, I went to OCS.
Oh, you went to OCS here?
Without
having graduated college?
Yeah. I had a proud year and a half of college.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you went to OCS, and then you went over there with the 173rd, the Herd, right?
Well, the Herd was over there. The 173rd Airborne was one of the first brigades, great combat unit that came to Vietnam when we started to put in American ground troops in the early 60s. The 173rd Airborne, which incidentally jumped into northern Iraq when
right.
the Turks
That was the
wouldn't
only
let
jump,
the 4th
right?
Division go through Turkey.
Yeah.
They took a vote. We taught them to vote, and they did. And they wouldn't let us go through Turkey. So we jumped the 173rd Airborne into northern Iraq in 2003, and they anchored northern Iraq. Didn't get a lot of resistance, but I actually came over with a congressional delegation and met them on their way down to Kirkuk. 173rd Airborne, a proud airborne brigade, which has a great history, but a great history in World War II also. But they were in Vietnam in the early 60s.
What year was that when you went over?
Yeah, I went over 1970, October 1970.
You were like 21.
I was there till November.
You were
or later.
21?
Yeah.
Okay, 22.
I was there till November 71, a little over 1 year. And I went with the Herd, 173rd Airborne. When they came home in July of 1971, I knew the commander at Charlie Rangers, C Company 75th Rangers, up in the Central Highlands, and I got him to request me, so I stayed and went with them till they stood down and came home. And there is no more Charlie Rangers, but they were a great operation.
And you knew Sergeant Charlie Beckwith? who had nothing to do with the Rangers, but he was the Delta Force commander.
Yeah,
too.
I know, but I got to know Charlie Beckwith later. He actually founded Delta Force, and he was a guy John Wayne played in the Green Berets. That was the character that John Wayne was molded after in the Green Berets. And you know, on that subject, Duncan, was only 2 positive movies about Vietnam, and I say this for my fellow Vietnam veterans. Between 1965 and about 2002 or 2003, there were only 2 positive movies about Vietnam that didn't depict Vietnam veterans as druggies, as guys that were working the angles, but as good soldiers. That was The Green Berets with John Wayne, 1968, and We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson.
Great movie.
The Battle of LZ X-Ray.
I was in OCS when I saw that.
2003. You and I saw that together.
That's right. During one of my 24-hour breaks.
Yeah, I picked you up at OCS at Quantico, and we went and saw that movie together. But only 2 did Hollywood turn out that were positive, what I'd call institutionally positive.
Well, yeah, but I could ask you, what's positive about any war? The answer is nothing.
But the people are noble.
The people are noble because those are the people that go and fight for their nation. But well, let me ask you this: what was it like when you came back? When you came back and you came through the airport, or you were in Texas, or were you in Alabama or Georgia, or wherever you were after the war in the 70s? What was it like?
Yeah, actually, I felt that I got a great reception. So when guys say I was spit at the airport, you know, remember the America that our guys came back to in the early 1970s. That was the America that gave Richard Nixon the majority vote in every single state in the nation when he ran against, I believe, George McGovern, except McGovern's home state of South Dakota, right? Voted for Nixon in every 49 out of 50 states. That was a conservative America. And what happened to a lot of Vietnamese or Vietnam veterans, unfortunately, is they came home through
like San Francisco, Los Angeles,
through LA, but also through Berkeley,
right,
through Travis Air Force Base near Oakland, where you'd have a little gauntlet of hippies.
So it's the same problem as it is today.
And they would shriek and yell at the returning soldiers, and they gave them a lifelong impression that America was mad at them coming home. Actually, I was treated great. I had purchased an island in the Snake River with a friend who was a rancher up in Idaho. And I came in through Fort Lewis, Washington, got out of the Army the day I got back. Only had like 2 months
Where my little
left.
brother was stationed at, Fort Lewis, Washington.
Yeah, Fort Lewis. Yeah, I got out. They didn't want to.
That's the other Hunter. He was in the Army, so we won't talk about him too much.
Hey, that's
we'll
my good.
No,
that's my good son.
Right.
That's Sam. And Sam was an enlisted guy who volunteered, like you, volunteered for Iraq, volunteered for combat, was an Army infantry guy. And he's right now in Corpus Christi, Texas, raising 5 kids.
Oh, we were talking about the reception that you had.
Yeah, so I had a good reception.
You had a good reception.
Yeah, and these guys you get a few guys that are what I call kind of professional veterans that talk about how they've been put upon. The worst thing in the world is to feel like you're put upon and develop a self-pity.
Well, to become a victim.
We're not
self-victimized in your own mind.
So I was treated great. Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I was treated. I mean, me and Sam. Shoot, after 9/11, I joined the Marine Corps because of 9/11, and we had a great reception. We couldn't buy a beer because of the attack on the towers. It was a lot different, I think, though, for my generation of warriors compared to yours because of that. I think we didn't have any bad reception, meaning if anybody from Berkeley would have shouted us down, they would have got clocked, right? Because of the threat of terrorism, the threat of the Islamic State, the threat of Al-Qaeda, the threat of the Taliban, all of that, and because of what they had done to New York, it really hit home, right? Anyway, but you have to admit,
as the
there's
British
a
poem
big
goes,
difference.
it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away, but it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. Meaning when the war starts, everybody where it really threatens them, everybody appreciates a soldier. But once again, the America of 1970-72 that elected Richard Nixon in every single state in America, except for one, that was a conservative America, and they actually gave a great reception. And I'm not talking about the little gauntlet of hippies that were at Berkeley, you know, who now are probably street people in San Francisco. Most Americans are very, very patriotic. And I think we're seeing that today. In fact, when you saw the football players kneel at the football games, the crowd didn't like that.
No.
And when you saw Donald Trump walk out on one of the national college games he got an amazing reception from the American people.
We talked about this earlier, and I jokingly blame your generation for all of the woes that we're facing today.
Just remember, I gave you life.
Whether it's healthcare, but especially academia. Yes, thank you. Thank you for making me. I appreciate that. But beyond that, yours, you could throw out Bill Clinton. Think of all the politicians, leaders your age. You were the ones in the 60s and 70s that infested academia with communism and socialism. And whatever the hell it is we have today in college, which is light years past the regular socialism, communism that they had in the 60s and 70s. So you're saying America was great, the American people, but those institutions were and are one of the greatest threats to our democracy. They actually teach the hating of America, the bringing down of America, and that started in the 60s and 70s, right? That started with the hippie generation, infested the schools. So even though politically, right, they don't have a huge play, they've changed America in a way that's actually shaped it on a curve to where it is now.
Liberals have their hands today on more levers of power, even though they're in the minority.
That's a great way to phrase it, the levers of power.
Than they ever have. And academia is one of them, but I would call it more of, rather than active, my generation actively ruining the country.
I've got to accuse somebody.
I would call it more of a benign neglect. And remember, your grandfather said something very profound. He said, Duncan, he said, we conservatives go out and we go into business and we try to make money and we try to make a good living for our family. He said Democrats tend to gravitate toward the news media, to be in the news media, and to be in academia. So you end up with a large portion of the Democrats and the liberals in our country. And I think they took a poll one time during the Jimmy Carter or during the Ronald Reagan years, right after the election, with a lot of the news leaders who actually decide what's on the cutting room floor and what gets shown on TV on the news. And the poll showed it was like 90% to 10% voted for Carter. So while the whole country was going conservative with Ronald Reagan, the news leaders were going liberal. And I think it's probably more pronounced today. So they've got their hands.
I think it is definitely more pronounced today. There's no question.
Yeah.
I mean,
and look at Hollywood. At least you had Charlton Heston, who used to campaign for me with the Great American. You had John Wayne. You had a number of people, of leaders in Hollywood who were conservatives and Republicans. It's hard to find them today.
Yeah.
It's almost...
They have to stay in secret. In fact, there's an actual group. It's called the, what's it called? Friends of Abe. And they have a secret list. It's a Hollywood list of Republicans that meet in secret. I don't know whether they wear robes.
I think you just defined how many there are. They got a secret list, and they got
right. Who knows?
Yeah, and it's kind of sad. But these liberals in Hollywood are like cookie cutter. There's no individuality.
There's not much thought to it anymore. Is what you're saying.
But remember that.
Let me go back. When you, okay, let's talk about you. We only have 30 minutes. That's what we're keeping this podcast series to. So let's go back to 1980. You get elected with Ronald Reagan. It's all about communism. It's all about winning the Cold War. It's all about building up the nation's military. And your motto, which you had mentioned earlier, that stuck with you for all your years in Congress, 28 years, was defense means jobs for San Diego. And it did. I mean, we have massive shipyards here now. We have a great industrial base. That's in large part because of you here in San Diego. They ought to name half of those ports after you, because you and the other members of Congress here, but spearheaded by you, created the industrial base in San Diego in the 80s and the 90s.
We've actually lost a lot of that, though, in aerospace, because aerospace defense has shrunk in terms of aerospace, but also the unfriendly business climate in California has pushed companies like Convair with the old General Dynamics.
Why would you be in California?
Out of California to other states.
Yeah.
If you want to visit Raytheon, you can go to Tucson. But
when you got into Congress, you didn't want to get on any other committees.
No,
you
Armed
were defense.
Services was a great one.
How many Vietnam combat veterans were in Congress at that time? Well, meaning not the number. Was there like 50 or was there 10? Because I was the first combat veteran in U.S. Congress from Iraq. There were none at that point. Now there's a bunch. Were there a bunch when you got elected?
Not too many. I'd say
That
a
was
handful.
10 years later.
I'd say a handful.
Okay.
Yeah, I think after World War II, it was almost everybody that got elected to Congress had been in the service. And compared to you, I'm no great combat veteran. I think I fired
I didn't
6
say I was a
magazines
great
in a
combat
year.
veteran, but the Marine Corps gives me a little thing that says I was a combat.
You took some rounds
veteran, at least.
in
Fallujah.
Yeah, in Fallujah, and you'd had
And
incoming
in 03
fire.
too, yeah.
But anyway, we showed up. That's what I did. I showed up.
Same here.
So and you did too, and your grandfather did, and your great grandfather was in World War I, and used to have to lean on every fifth parking meter walking down the street because he'd inhaled a lot of mustard gas. So this
Which
country's
great-grandfather
gone through-
was that?
That was John Young.
John Young.
Yeah. So he was in the
And he was
in
named
the
after
infantry in
John
France.
Duncan Young,
Yeah.
who was your
John Duncan Young.
who was your great grandfather.
Yeah.
Okay.
So John Duncan Young was my great grandfather, and my grandfather was John Duncan Young II.
And he's a famous Texas cowboy, ranger, trail driver with a book written about him called A Vaquero of the Brush Country.
Yeah, still being published by the University of Texas.
That's a great story. We'll talk about that one day, and maybe get somebody from the press there to come on the show. All right, so you focused on.
We'll promise some door prizes.
You focused on defense, and when the wars in Iraq started, 2001, Iraq and Afghanistan. When did you become chairman of the Armed Services Committee?
I think that was around 2003.
2003. So a year after 9/11, you become chairman, possibly one of the most powerful members of Congress. In fact, one of the most powerful members of Congress as chairman of the Armed Services Committee during wartime, and I was in, because this made it unique too, I was in Iraq in 03 and 04 while you were chairman. And we'll talk about that later too, but so you were chairman then from 2003 to 2006, because Democrats took over in 2006. The war was not a popular thing.
The Democrats played the war card in 2006 and took Congress back.
And Rumsfeld really pissed me off. Rumsfeld resigned like a day after the election. We all said, why didn't you resign a month before the election or 2 months?
Yeah.
Because that would have shown that Bush's government was off of war footing. Well, you can think whatever, but Rumsfeld shouldn't have waited till the day after the election.
But I don't think Rumsfeld should have resigned. I thought he did a good job. I thought the Abu Ghraib.
If you're my point is, if you're gonna resign, don't do it after the election. That's all I'm saying. You get out of there and let somebody else come.
I reject your point.
So Congress took a massive shellacking. Democrats took over in 2006. So you weren't chairman anymore. Then you retired and ran for president in 2008. But you were
2007.
In 2007.
Because what you do is you really start running for president about a year and a half early.
Wow.
I announced before the election in 2006, I said, I'm going to be running for president, so I don't want to surprise my constituents. If you still want to vote for me on November 8th or whatever the date was, I said, I welcome that because I am running, but I want you to know I don't want to surprise you by in November telling you I'm now running.
You were
for
honest
president.
with the voters?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it was a crazy idea. I thought I'd try it, but anyway, I felt that was good to have done that early on. So I went out, and what you do is it's a long windup, right? You start going to New Hampshire, Iowa. You went to some of the places with me, South Carolina, right? So we won the Fox News straw poll in 07. I tied McCain and Giuliani at the top with the Fox News straw poll in South Carolina with 26%. I won the Arizona straw poll, and these are the little straw polls that the Republican Party has, and I won the Texas straw poll at their Texas State Convention. And it was downhill from there. At that point,
right, life doesn't end though after you.
But
Huckabee, Huckabee was great.
My great friend Huckabee started out on the other side of me on the debate. He was the 10th guy on a 10th man
He did really
field.
well.
He won Iowa, the Iowa primary, with more votes than anybody had ever won Iowa with. And to show the way that politics changes and the waves change, I politicked, as you know, I then after you helped Trump and you endorsed Trump, I endorsed him also, but I helped Huckabee in that 2016 race. He lost in Iowa, even though he'd gotten more votes than anybody in history in 08.
Okay.
So the wave passed. I still think that Mike Huckabee would make a great president.
I don't think so. I think he's too old, just like Biden's too old. Trump, though, my favorite president of all time. Trump, you're my man. So forget George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. For me, it's the president that pardoned me.
Yeah.
That gave me a
Well,
presidential pardon. Hey, so let me ask you. So
He
got
was,
out
he was the last bastion of justice.
So enough about Huckabee. Trust me, he's got his own show. He doesn't need you to plug him on this one, okay? Honestly, okay.
But can we get Larry Gatlin?
So you don't win the presidency. Life isn't over, though. You wrote a book about the Iraq War called Victory in Iraq, How America Won the War. And let me ask you this. Would you ever write another nonfiction book again that has to be footnoted like the one about maneuvering in a massive war? That's a tough book to write.
The reason I wrote Victory in Iraq was for this simple reason. I wanted the hundreds of thousands of Americans who served in Iraq to know that what they did was something of value. They did win in Iraq because we actually, the Marines, through a combination of fierce firepower and working with the tribes, actually got the Sunni tribes in western Iraq to split off from Al-Qaeda, even though they were both Sunnis. They were Sunnis just like Al-Qaeda was. They split off and came over on our side, and in 2007 we had a couple of leaders of the tribes, and within weeks we had hundreds of tribes coming over to America's side, because not only did we fight fiercely, but we built hospitals, we built schools, we helped them with utilities. We were good to them.
You have two great books. You wrote one that you say is easy to write about a war that's now a historical book. People ought to pick it up. And then you wrote one about the desert here in San Diego, about the great Leon Lesica, a guy that just did great wildlife stuff. That's also a great book. Beautiful pictures in it. Called Desert Wildlife, right? What's it called?
Yeah,
I should know the name of your book.
It's called Leon's Desert, and
Leon's Desert.
It's about, you know, if you leave San Diego and you drive east, you go over the coastal mountains, you drop down into that low desert, like what's south of Palm Springs, for thousands and thousands of acres, and for about 100 miles until you get to the Colorado River. It's a vast desert. We have a vast desert. Lots of animals in that desert. They get about an inch and a half, 2 inches of rainfall a year. And one of the great conservationists and hunters in America, in fact, I think the greatest conservationist in this country, was a contractor named Leon Lesica, lived in the desert all of his life, grew up there as a kid. And he designed a unique way of developing water holes for wildlife without putting wells in. He used runoff in the infrequent rains into a buried tank with a drinking box next to it. It saved the populations of deer, bighorn sheep, all the other dozens of species of birds. So a hunter, Leon Lesica, who hunted animals and liked to hunt, was actually a much greater conservationist than many of the people that belong to the Audubon Society or other so-called
hunters want more
conservation
animals, so we can hunt them. Right?
Well,
So we can harvest them.
Yeah, but it's also because Leon Lesica never got a permit to go hunt a bighorn sheep, but he helped to bring their populations back on hundreds of square miles.
That's about as rare as true love in California, one of those permits to hunt a bighorn sheep.
Well,
So that's our podcast. I think we're out of time, but I think what you've done is introduced another episode on Iraq totally, because you know about Iraq. We'll talk about the book. We'll talk about the war. I was there serving. You were the chairman. I think we can talk about the desert wildlife.
I want to talk
some
about
great folks
Afghanistan because you were there and what happened.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't have stayed in Afghanistan at all. It's a let's just say it's not a great place to be, and I don't think Americans should ever be there. And I'm glad we're out. We can talk about that too. But folks, we really appreciate you joining us here. You can tell it's going to be lively conversations, deep conversations, and flippant ones at the same time. We appreciate you. And subscribe to us. We're going to have some interesting guests on. I think the next podcast is going to be on human trafficking. We have a friend who the movie Sound of Freedom is loosely based on their organization and what they do and how they save kids. And Kirby's going to be on with us. He was the oldest Navy SEAL, the longest serving Navy SEAL. He was also a frogman before there were even Navy SEALs. And I've had a friend say about him that Kirby killed more people than smallpox. So, but he's going to be on. He's a great guy.
He saves people now.
We'll see you next time.